afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the first podcast of the Indigenous Prosperity Center. Today, we're talking to Chrissy Chen, the manager of the Tsawout Fisheries Department, in our podcast we're calling Stewards of the Sea, Tsawout Fisheries. Thank you so much for joining me, Chrissy.
Nice to be here, Christina.
So we met when I was working on a project removing derelict vessels from the sea. And it was a pleasure to meet you. And Tsawout First Nation was very proactive in wanting to clean up some of the sunken vessels around your territory. And so I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to learn more about that. And I understand that you've been working in the marine space for nearly 30 years. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, 30 years. I was going to say 34, but gives my age away. But anyway, I started many years ago in enhancement of many watersheds in my territory in the Quiet, Port Hardy. So it was 9 years I sat there or worked there, protecting and rehabilitation of the streams, rivers, and the creeks with fish bearing. So that was a great. I really enjoyed doing that. The husbandry work throughout the hatchery work, and then enhancing 9 rivers in and around our territory, and then being a joint venture with all the stakeholders like WFP and Orca and Sand, DFO, the Quatsi Stewardship Center, the watershed Marble River Hatchery. So it was a lot of efforts put into enhancement with many fish bearing streams and rivers. It was a great experience. I just loved being around the fish. It was amazing. Sometimes we'd be netting some of the brood stock, and people would say, just look at all the fish that are surrounded her. Like they literally would be rubbing on my legs. Like I could just put my hands in there and pet them and tell them that everything's going to be okay and we're going to make babies for you. So it was a really good experience. I love that part of the job, especially with the creeks that were all plugged up from whatever, like large woody debris, small trees falling into the creeks and that. But to remove all that woody debris and having water run through them and having those little fishies, the little pars that were waiting in pools. I mean, I may say it sounds geeky, but it was the greatest thing ever to see that life come back into those streams. So I would dedicated 9 years of my life and career into that. And then I had the honors of sitting on the board of directors. And there's about 8 of us sitting on those board of directors. So I continued doing that, even though I moved on to the fisheries coordinator for Quiet First Nation. So I sat on the board of directors for an additional 6 years, but I didn't really care about the finance. I didn't care about day-to-day operations. I cared about how many fish were released in those rivers. So it was great. We did a lot of code wire tagging, a lot of releasing, making sure the fish went back to the native rivers they were from. So it was very exciting for me. And then I had the joys a couple of years being the not seniority person, scrubbing circulars and buckets for a couple of years. But I had to work every Saturday. But I really enjoyed it because I got to bring my children out with me so they could experience the different parts of the watershed, the bog areas, the streams that needed to be, some of the beaver homes needed to be removed a bit. So it was a great experience. I love that part of that job. Then I moved into being the fisheries coordinator for Quiet. So that was more office work. And then dealing with the commercial fishermen. We are commercial fishing First Nation out in Port Hardy. So it was a lot of different areas that I needed to know, and different vessels that had to be maintained, and upgrading of everybody's safety and marine first aid, and there's a lot of work put into all that kind of stuff just to make sure the crews were safe. So coordinated the salmon, of course, the gillnet salmon, the sea salmon, the halibut quota that we held. We have a prawn license up there, and then herring licenses. So it was, every season had much to do. And I enjoyed every bit of it. So it was a challenge. Not only just being a woman, but being an Indigenous woman was a challenge, but I overcame. So I eventually moved up to promoted into the full-blown fishery manager for the Quiet Nation Development Corporation and the Quiet First Nation AFS Aboriginal Fisheries Strategy Department. So that led to many other things. So of course, the first thing on my list was we need a 10-year job prescription for our watershed, the watershed that was very important to the nation, and that was the Clarke watershed sustainability plan that we did. And I was so grateful to have Pacificus Biological Services helping with that, as they are all registered biologists. So it ended up that many works needed to be done. There was not enough biologists to help us, so they pretty much showed us how to do things, and then we just did it on our own. And they signed off. They said you did a good job. And of course, DFO was a part of it too as well. And they're biologists. So there again, Port Hardy, not enough biologists as well as CPs up there. So we just had to make it work. But it was very successful. And then I remember once before my manager allowed me to be the full-blown manager, and he left to other positions down island, and I said, how can I do a plan, a training plan? He goes, you just finished doing a $1.3 million proposal to buy gear and to buy a vessel and to buy more quota. You could do a $500,000 training plan. So it was very successful. It was 90% successful. I had 52 nation members, all get their small vessel operators, all their marine radios, marine safety, the radio operators. And again, like I said, we were commercial fishing people, let alone taking care of our beautiful beaches with all the shellfish that we held. And then yeah, it just flourished from there. There was other nations connecting with us and having dialogue, collaboration work with neighboring nations, and as well as different committees that I sat on. So I sat on the First Nation Fishery Council for many years, and I still do today. IMOG, Island Marine Aquatic Working Group, great bunch of people, a great bunch of knowledgeable people with all these resources that we could just ask them if they would assist us in any way. So yeah, so 30 years, that's like goes back so far. I think within the 30 years, I probably helped and assist either with little small contracts to do their reporting, outstanding reporting or whatever. If there's times that their manager or coordinator have left the position, so I was in there to help them and redo their licenses or put them out for bids, and or licenses they held with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So I've done that. Probably about 16 nations that I helped up out there.
I think that's wonderful to take what you've learned at the very grassroots, like right there with the baby fishes, and now at greater and greater spheres of influence, to take that information and help nations work with it, and then learn all of the admin side, all the paperwork side to support the work. What brought you to SÄOUT?
Well, I was so honored because I got hired during COVID. So I applied for the position through a friend of mine that used to be the manager here, Dan Claxton. I applied in October and I didn't get an interview till February. So I said, good things happen when you wait. So I believe the entire chief and council on the call, on the Zoom call, doing my interview. And I think they strategized and says you have an hour to do the interview, and then they turned around and said you have 30 minutes. So I'm like trying to elaborate and try to be quick at my responses. But I said every time I said something, I said I'll elaborate better when you hire me next week. So then the ninth question, oh, I will elaborate more when you hire me next week. So I had them all laughing and everything. So I don't know. I'm just truly blessed that they did hire me. I brought a lot of asset with knowledgeable. I don't know everything. I learn every day, but I brought a lot of the Douglas Treaty background as I sat on leadership for 6 years. So we really emphasized our rights up in Port Hardy. So I got to bring that here with SÄOUT. So, and then the background of the commercial fishing deparation facility we did up there with Health Canada and Environment Canada, water sampling. So a little bit of contracts here and there paid off in the end. So like I don't know everything, but I knew bits and pieces on how to start a hatchery or how to start a business plan, which I'm grateful for my nation that allowed me to take part in that.
What is Tsawout Fisheries focused on currently?
We are focusing on probably more besides our marine use law, going by our marine use law and our Douglas Treaty. We are focusing on our guardianship program, monitoring our territory, joint venture. First and foremost is enforcement and protection. We need to do that with the most valuable resources that are important to the nation members. So we've been communicating and having surveys and things like that with the membership. Community engagement meetings are very helpful. They could give you a lot of insight on what's important to them. So I run with that. I run with their community comprehensive plan. We're just going to start our own marine use plan. There is some documentation, but I need to focus on what is really important for and to protect and conserve. And there's a lot of resources that are very meaningful to the nation. And then having a deparation facility is one of the most important things from our elders, because they said that it's just easy to close down these beaches, which it is, instead of figuring out what's wrong with the wastewater pipelines or the leaky septic fields or whatever and however they've been deemed as pollutant. We got to fix that.
What did you call that? Demarcation? What's the word for it? It's a facility for
Deparation.
Deparation.
For
cleaning shellfish.
So you find a nice clean area for to hang cages, like they're layers of cages, and then you layer your shellfish in it. Then in 9 days you go do a sample and send it to CFIA or a lab to tell you is it edible or what's in it, and then you do it. You have to be consistent in those samplings. So it's a lot of work when you hit day 14. Every day you've sampled, and then day 14 there's a big storm coming in, and I'm just sitting there almost crying because I'm like, there goes our 15th sample and we got to start all over again.
Yeah.
And
so once you have 15 samples, does that mean that it's safe to eat?
No, it depends on what CFI, Canadian Food Inspection, says. This is edible on day 17, or this is edible day 16. So you have to be consistent on where you get them, and then you decorate them. So they're siphon fish, shellfish. So you got to be on it, and if you don't, then it's starting from sample number 1 again.
Yeah, and is that for both commercial sales and for community use for food sustenance?
I'm just focusing on food, social, ceremonial.
Yeah.
And when I have to say all three, because all three mean something different food, social, and ceremonial. So just like salmon, we have salmon come in for food, we distribute. Then we have some for social events. Then we have some for cultural, for the big house, for their ceremonies, whatever the nation needs those salmon for.
That makes
So I
sense.
just need to stress that.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah.
You mentioned a new tourism venture. Can you share what that is yet?
Yeah, it's just getting into, we're almost ready to sign on the dotted line, and I believe pretty much everybody else knows about it for so far. We're always trying to focus on, especially the saltwater people, say out of how important the marine waters is. So why would we not be, we're trying to focus on being self-determination nation. So how can we start doing that? Well, economic opportunity is number one. And I believe that Justin Trudeau sent that out and saying people's businesses, industries, and companies start engaging with the nations that you are aligned with, whoever's your neighbor or next door neighbor. So I had like an acquaintance that I knew, and he says, wow, you're here in Tsawout. He goes, I'm trying to sell my business, but I would love to sell it to a nation. And he goes, and then I would sell it to Tsawout First Nation because they're right. This is their territory. So that was the, we're just waiting for a little bit more paperwork. And then we're going to be signing on the dotted line with the Sydney whale watching. We're going to be purchasing that. So we're going to keep the manager and the previous owner for a couple of years just to mentor and train some of our people. Or, they got to go to school a little bit and do some tourism. And it's just going to be the greatest thing ever because we're going to lead on that. So it's not just going to be just a whale watching. We want to interpret our language, our culture, and the history. So, you're going to get three things under the one thing that everybody wants to do is see the whales. Mm-hmm. So, and then a little bit of education as well. So it's going to be a great thing.
Yeah, and I think people
I'm so honored to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And I think people will be very interested to learn about the environmental protection efforts that go along with it. I mean, this is about the food source for the whales, for example.
Exactly.
It's all connected. So you convened an all nations collaboration meeting for South Island Marine teams in January, which I was so pleased to attend. Why did you decide to host that meeting?
I guess it was probably about 6 months prior. I got reached out by a couple of nations saying, well, how did you do your marine use law? How did you start a joint venture with Cascadia Seaweed and start growing your own seaweed? And then just the noise of the announcements of that through Cascadia Seaweed, as well as just the networking that I have in the background. I'd post on my social media, Facebook. So they started being intriguing about that. So I'm like, then there was another nation that would call, well, how did you do that? Can my team come there? Instead of doing it individually with the 9 nations that were calling me, I said, okay, that's it. Everybody, let's all come to the table as tier 1s and invite anybody in every nation to come and learn. And maybe we could learn something from them and we could do joint ventures together. Like instead of reinventing the wheel, like let's utilize each other. So that's how I said we could see in individual conversations, let's have a group conversation. And it led into great things. There was over 32 of us there. And now they're so excited. A couple of nations saying, we want to host the next one. So I want to keep that going, just, because we can work together. We'd be so powerful. We all could achieve the same thing, is because we're wanting to do the guardian. We want to monitor. We want to protect. We want to have enforcement. We want to know what everybody's doing. We want to clean the water for all the living life that's in there. So it's a no-brainer. Let's do it together.
Yeah. And one of the things that came out of that day was this podcast series. because people are saying this is such important work that everybody's doing and nobody knows about it. I mean, you've been talking about 34 years of working in the space, and I think it's virtually unknown about the Indigenous leadership in the space. So celebrating this work that's going, as well as, you know, building collaborations, it's exciting. I'm really excited to
But I
witness it.
need to, yeah, and I need to say too, maybe a little bit was because of the announcement of the reconciliation. You know, we've only waited 200 years. So, you know, with, you know, it's the good and the bad and ugly with Justin Trudeau coming aboard. Maybe he's fixing the horrible black chapter of his dad managing Indigenous peoples then. You know, like, I can't do this for 40 years and let my next generation continuing for 40 years justifying what Indigenous people can do as stewards of the land, sea, and air. So I think that helped a little bit. I know people are stalling on it, governments and NGOs and everybody else. I know it's going to be a different way to have, I don't want to say older, or but to have them, their mindset, they're looking straight instead of looking out of the box, because it is a time for change, and it's going to be a good time for Indigenous change. Finally, we're going to have say, and we're going to have a seat at these tables.
And it's leadership, because you're not just saying, what can we do? You're saying, we're doing this. This is what we're doing. And it's an opportunity for everybody else to support that work and encourage that work and participate where we can.
Asserting our rights. It's been affirmed. Like, how much more affirmation do you need? We just got to utilize it. You got to assert it. You just got to, don't take no for an answer, and just do it, because that's what I'm going to be doing. I need to leave a legacy. I need to do it for my grandchildren and 7 generations to come. I'm not going to be like my previous 20 chiefs in my knowledgeable ones that I call time after time after time, and learning from them. They repeated themselves for 30 years and the government wasn't listening. So now they're listening, which is great. So I really appreciate, and I believe that I carry that for them.
Where do you see the most opportunity for collaboration?
Guardian, monitoring, enforcement, and protection. Those are huge. They're the most important to any Indigenous peoples, hands down. We had a little incident about we got our seiner out in the waters, and people were complaining about that we were fishing with the killer whales. Well, I mean, they know the rules. You stop your engine and everything else. Like, why would we harm them? We're the stewards of the land, sea, and air. Like, you know, they're just misconceptions and they just heard it, and then it just turns into gossip. Wasn't true. You know, there was a few times that in Quiet's territory, we were going out to do some commercial herring. And the chief phoned me, and a couple of their stewards called me and says, Chrissy, we're trying to rebuild the stocks. Can you please just tell them to turn around and go back? You know, we're commercial fishing. And I said I did it. I phoned my crew on 2 vessels, 8 guys, and told them to turn around. I sacrificed their bread and butter for the protection of what that nation wanted to do. And good things happen when you wait, because that was a good decision that we made, and we can be proud of it. You know, we can make money next year or a year later. Let's protect the resource now.
And protect the relationship.
Yeah, and I've said it for 10 years. Let's just shut everything down for a while. Let's refocus. Let's relook. You know, I keep telling that to some governments, and they know who they are. Let's get these Indigenous people that have been on the water for 65 years and tell you where these guys are spawning, tell you where they were, you know, at, like where abundance were. You know, they have so much knowledge and so much to offer. Then you have these Western science people thinking, oh, we'll just do a sample here and I know everything. Well, it doesn't work that way. And obviously they've failed at managing many of our resources. Hopefully they're listening. But they know I say that to them all the time. So
What do you think is next for the Indigenous marine sector? What changes do you see coming?
changes are coming as Indigenous led. We're going to lead. Whatever resource that nation holds dearly to them, that is what we're going to monitor and protect and conserve. Totally, like specific resources, specific areas, cultural heritage areas, where they used to do it once upon a time, 200, 300 years ago, these clam gardens, it's all coming back. It's coming back. And I wish we could do a lot more, but when you're limited funds trying to do that, you could just do what you can with that.
Like there's climate solutions in there. Like there are opportunities for us to rethink how we engage with the land and sea that is sustainable. And I think that's part of the reason why I think it's so important for us to highlight this work, because it is innately sustainable. No First Nation is going to hurt their land and their territory. They love it.
Yeah.
So if we look to the nations and the work they're doing in each in their own territory and support that work, it benefits everyone.
Yeah. Like you look back 10,000 years, there's evidence that Quaggas and Tsawout's been here 9,000 years plus. So they were sustainable. They didn't have a grocery store to go to. They were farmers. They grew vegetables, corn, and everything else. They lived off of 900 different kind of seaweeds and kelp. Like that was their food. That was their medicine. Like the shellfish. I could see in 1893, one of my elders that I hold dearly to me, her name was Sarah Hunt. She must have been 70, but in 1893, she had piles and piles of cockles to smoke for the winter. When she's sitting there with a wee basket and she had hundreds and hundreds of cockles. So there was abundance and barefoot. Then you could see the scenery in the background with the big houses in the background. So like, oh yeah, we were there. The Shellfish Island, or we call it Shellfish Island because the Shell Island, all the shells would land there because of the tides. Just to see that 100 years ago, that it was there, it was abundance.
Yeah.
We were fish weirs. We had, they laced up alder for nets. So the high tides would come in, then they would put the net down, the tide would go out. They were select fishing. They would take what they need, then they would let that alder net go and let all the fish go for the next time they needed to get fed or feed their people. So we sustained everything. And now we're rebuilding stocks. We're trying to help the management people that are trying to manage all our resources. There's, for instance, our Cascadia seaweed farm. I said, we want to do whatever we want with 10% of that seaweed. And we're going to leave it there. We're going to leave that there for the sea urchins, the salmon, the birds, whatever. We'll just leave it there. It's not all about money. Eventually it'll help our sea urchins and we can have their abundance now, but we want to protect them, right? So I think it's going to be a good thing.
The abundance in the future too.
Yeah, for 7 generations to come. We'll get life back into those estuaries and the streams and the rivers that have salmon bearing trying to live and they're not living. So we're going to fix that.
And you've touched on it. An area that I find really fascinating is where when you bring Indigenous knowledge and wisdom, and then you support it with, marine biologist or an industrial partner, and you start, and when it's Indigenous led, so that that the sustainable piece is in place, that the long-term thinking is in place. But when you bring Indigenous knowledge to the table, I guess another way of putting what I'm trying to say is the innovation that will occur. These are ancient practices, but incredibly innovative to sort of Western kind of ways of being. This is innovation, and it's very exciting. And I think that there's solutions for the future in there, as I said a moment ago.
Yeah, just like the fish weirs that they have here and there, everywhere, all the way up the coast, they have reef netting here. So that too left the smaller fish to be released, and they would only take the adults. And again, that's select fishing. They select fish there to protect the smaller ones when they come around next year or two and grew to be adults. So
fascinating. I wonder whether we have any questions from our audience. Although I know our audience is going to find us, not necessarily today too, they're going to find this recording and learn from that, and hopefully they'll visit the SÄOUT website, learn a little bit more. And we're going to be, when I say we, I mean you, me, others in this All Nations collaboration project. We're going to keep storytelling and highlighting the good work that folks are doing and bringing that news to the whole region so that people can learn, and maybe
I think that's
collaborations.
Yeah. It's good. It's a good way to connect with the public. I know they could Google or whatever, but they need to be educated. They need to know where nations are going now with reconciliation. There's action plans here and there, but reading them and doing them are two different things. So I will hold that on to the governments to make sure they do some kind of action plan.
Because it is urgent. I mean, there's multiple urgent things here. There's the environment is in urgent need of care, but there's also an urgency we can't have reconciliation if we don't stop harmful practices that are still in place. So change is needed.
Yeah.
And then some of the areas we're talking about around, how the co-management. I mean, we're seeing more examples of co-management and Indigenous-led environmental management, which I think is a positive step. And it's great to hear that you're working on that with SÄOUT, the Marine Use Plan.
Yeah, with the Marine Use Plan implemented last year in June, we're going with it, and that's letting all the industries, companies, and governments coming to us to get a permit or a license. But I really need to focus on the Indigenous protection conservation area. We're going to put it in our core marine territory in our marine waters. That's hugely important. And that's where the joint ventures with Ghost Gear, we need to remove that. We need to remove those stuff in order to rebuild those kelps and seaweeds and beaches and whatever resource resides there. We need to bring that back. It's so important. So in order to do that, we are going to be implementing and signing on a declaration this spring. SÄOUT's going to be part of, was it Mamalikala, Kirisuhehe, and there's a few others that have signed on IPCAs. So this is the way to go. It's important for the nation to protect our resources before they're gone.
Yes, important for each nation and important for our whole planet.
Absolutely.
So no small task. We're just saving the world.
Well, I have this Saturday, I've asked my crew if we could take out actually the Quayuts, my nation where I'm from, are coming down. I have a Quetzino First Nation that I have interest. They're going to come for a tour. A handful on the mainland. We have Guilford and Namgis coming down for a tour. This is exciting. And it's not, I've been doing that on the side of my desk, inviting these people, showing them on Facebook, showing them through emails what we've been doing. It's just so they don't get left behind. The opportunity is there. let's run with it. Like if you need any resources or networking, I'm here to help. So anybody that wants to have that. So, and I would say the same thing for Psycha Malahat. You know, we work really good with Malahat. They offer so much to us. I really respect their marine team and their managers, Esquimalt and Souk, even Cowichan and Songis. It's going to be great. It's going to be great to collaborate together. We can be more powerful that way and help
It
each
creates
other.
real-time innovation. You
Yeah.
know, like as things can be implemented immediately. Someone's found a better way to do something, then people can learn right away and continue to innovate.
Yeah, and I think when it first initially, when we started collaborating, a few of us, was when these boats were going down. You know, we're on these Coast Guard calls, and you know, we have a boat, we don't have the, you know, the gear to go out there, and but Malahat has the gear and the boat, but no stats. So we're, you know, running around like we should be the first leading on these kind of things. And it's starting to work because Coast Guard, Environment Canada are saying we need to know what's important to you guys. We'll bring it to our higher ups and let us know what we can do. And you inform us what these protected areas are. So I really appreciate that. You know, I never had to deal with Coast Guard or Environment Canada and all them. So for them to have that opportunity for us to say, this is what you need to do, you know, or this is a good way to start, you know, good on them. Now, just the other government's got to lead with them.
And I think partly what will show is the success that'll come out of those good partnerships, and that more and more like that, it's change at the government level. You know, there's a lot of people that we work with that want to change things. They want to take away barriers. They want to fix the system from the inside. And it's wonderful to see that happen. And you know, we just need governments to keep developing a better and better mandate for their workers to implement. Because sometimes it used to be that there were people at the front lines in government that really wanted to work together to make change, but policy wasn't there, or the mandate wasn't there. Now we're starting to get a bit more alignment. I'm seeing that, I'm hoping that in alignment with what people in Canada are saying that they want. They're saying they want the government to do a better job at reconciliation, and that means changing things.
Right.
And in the economic development, you know, sector, it's I think it's Dr. Leanne Joe that wrote "Step into the River," and she said that the business world isn't exempt from truth telling. You know, we have to talk about the things we haven't, the areas that haven't worked well in the past. You know, the problems that, you know, the government policies and the impacts that those have had. The impacts are still present, and they're still impacting efforts to do the work that we're talking about. So we have to keep talking about them, even if it makes people uncomfortable, or, you know, it's part of the creating change piece.
Yeah, it was reconciliation.
Yeah.
And you know, the horrible dark chapter of the residential, that's going to take a long time to heal. People are going to take, you know, 3 or 4 more generations, but to educate and learn and heal the way we want to, or the nation wants to, is very important. And I do see some governments reaching out, and I know again they have the policy that they're not allowed to engage or whatever, but that's my forte. I'd rather have a face-to-face meeting and not on the Zoom. So
Yes.
it's important. And we've only had a couple of them that have done that so far. So, but we'll wait for the others to show up.
Just keep doing the work and showing the way, and it's going to happen.
Yeah. Especially with the Douglas Treaty. I think nobody really realizes what the Douglas Treaty means. You know, fish as formal, hunt as formally. That's huge.
And there was a commercial fishery in place at the time of signing those treaties, so it should be acknowledged. And I think that the proactive work the nations are doing around stewardship helps the public understand and maybe put pressure on policy that you can trust First Nations to have sustainable practices, because that's their whole goal. I mean, they're out there promoting stewardship. That's the same people you're at where, you can trust to set the fishery limits for themselves.
Yeah. It'll be good to be part of the commercial. We're commercial too. We have a shrimp license and some crab and all that, but we need to sustain that. We need to make sure all the resources are shared with nations. A lot of nations don't have that capacity of resources, but if they're a Douglas Treaty or have some kind of treaty, they missed that opportunity because of the way the government was dictating to the nations, I guess. I'm trying not to get too political, but I can at sometimes. So.
I mean, and for our audience, I mean, the Douglas Treaty, the Douglas treaties that were signed in 1850 on the South Island explicitly state that the nations have the right to hunt and fish as formerly, and there has not been policy to respect and support those efforts. And in fact, nations have been prohibited from carrying out their Douglas Treaty rights. So that's why people like yourself need to continue to say it, that there's a Douglas Treaty right. Mm-hmm. And so we're helping to spread the word that that's where that comes from and why.
Yeah, we've been doing a bunch of webinars with our legal advisors, so we'll have that on our website, but it would be great if anybody wanted to learn, follow our website and connect with them, because it's very knowledgeable. You can learn a lot.
And I think that's a good sort of final message to leave people with, is there's a lot of great information. You have to dig a little bit. It's worth digging, and we'll do our best to kind of collate some of it, bring it together, particularly around marine stewardship. It's so the nations on the South Island are so strong in this area that I think there's something to kind of show the world about how, if we can find a way to work closely with local governments and industry and NGOs and universities to all kind of align our objectives, I think we could really be transformative, and I think the world could learn from what we can do here on the South Island.
And I think all us human walking people could benefit from that. Like for tourism, people all over the world want to know and want to buy those products from Indigenous people. But the economic that's coming in here, and they want to do a tour with us or come to our big house, and that's bringing a lot of funding for everybody to gain from. So why would we not want to walk together with each other and support each other? It's so important, with our history. Our history is so important to us, and hopefully to some now, but it's very important. I think we have a gold nugget here that us being Indigenous people, we have a lot of stories to tell. People want to know about it. People want to be here. They want to buy our seaweed. They would want to buy, a corporate seaweed. So, it's interesting to, they go, we're not going to buy our beer there. We're going to buy your Canadian beer. Do you have any Indigenous beer? But there, a lot of them are from Denmark, Switzerland, and Germany. They just want everything Indigenous. So we can move mountains here if anybody wants to connect with us. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for meeting with me today and having this conversation. And I've learned a lot. Although it's 34 years of you did a good job of explaining the depth of, we're talking right at the front lines, counting fish and tagging fish, into developing marine use protection plans and multi-nation collaborations. And it's a long journey, but it's really interesting one.
Yeah, I love it. It's my passion. I try to do something else before, and I'm like, I need to be in that river, or I need to be on that boat. So I'm grateful for where I sit right now and be a part of it.
I'm grateful for you too. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I jokingly called you the auntie of Indigenous marine stewardship, but really you are. You've really, and turning around and sharing what you've learned is very much part of that. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Christina.
And I look forward to attending the next all collaboration meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.